Everything in creation spins and vibrates. Everything has its own prime resonance frequency. Everything. And this is why once we can identify a prime resonance frequency of a bacterium or an atom or whatever it is, or a soccer field, we can then manipulate that object with its prime resonance frequency. Sound and resonance, common links of creation and religion. In Christianity, it's the word. In Hinduism, it's Om. The Egyptians believed the universe was sung into creation, and the original people of Australia, not the Aboriginal, I forgot to take the ab out. They're not abnormal, the original people of Australia. It's a twist on words there, remember? Keep that in mind. So it's the original people of Australia believed that the world was created with 3 sacred songs. And then we have the phenomenal similarities between the 6 days of creation in Christianity and the word that created everything, the 6 aspects of Om, and the 6 aspects of the all-seeing eye of Horus, and you start seeing the connections between all these ancient cultures and the creation stories. And then the creation stories get even more interesting when you read the Hindu creation story. It says, everything was so peaceful and silent that Vishnu slept undisturbed by dreams or motion. From the depths, a humming sound began to tremble. It grew and spread, filling the emptiness and throbbing with energy. The night had ended. Vishnu awoke. That's just a little more dramatic version of saying God said, let there be light. Same thing. It's just great when you start seeing these connections. Sound is a source of all creation. Sound and resonance is responsible for everything. It is the breath of the Creator, the prime resonance frequency, and the source code for everything in creation, including our DNA. And this is from Dan Winter's brilliant documentaries and work on the DNA and sound and resonance. I would recommend you check out Dan Winter's work on that as well. How cymatics and sound helps to form and shape our DNA and the structure of our DNA based on the cymatics. And that word cymatics, it comes from Hans Jenny in the 50s and 60s, the brilliant work that he did and showed us how sound and resonance is responsible for everything in creation. By now you should know that sound manifests physical form, and this is the most basic example. I think you might have to manipulate the sound here. It might get a bit hectic. If your ears are sensitive, just block your ears because it could get a bit loud. This is the most basic, fundamental demonstration how sound and resonance manifests into physical form. And I just cannot get enough of it. I can watch it millions of times. Every frequency has its own specific shape, a prime resonance frequency. Are you only looking at a 2-dimensional representation of a 3-dimensional effect? I think he actually uses rice on a metal plate here. And this is just in the spectrum that we can hear. You can imagine in the low frequencies that we can't hear, it has the same effect. The higher the frequency, the more complex the shapes. The lower the frequency, the more basic and the larger the shapes. The wavelengths get shorter and shorter as you go higher. Wavelength is actually also, it just doesn't quite do it, because it's not really a wave that we're dealing with here. something very different, far more complex. It's almost at the edge of our... Okay, so the original people of Australia have a creation story that says time began when the supernatural beings awoke and broke through the surface of the earth. So imagine the surface of the earth being something like this, that metal plate being the surface of the earth, and the supernatural beings broke through the surface of the earth, and they created the surface of the earth with 3 sacred songs. This is from Hans Jenny's brilliant video, Cymatics. This is powder on a metal plate. It's not a liquid or a jelly, it's powder. You can see landscapes being formed here over extended periods of time. Mountains can form, valleys, volcanoes, all to do with the sound of the earth, coming out of the earth. Now watch that.
We can recognize the various patterns of the vibratory fields. They move to and fro, unite, and separate again according to the vibratory state of the surface formed by the membrane.
So it's interesting that I linked this to the Aboriginal people or original people of Australia and the 3 sacred songs, and it's very similar to this picture that I took from an aeroplane flying over Western Australia, and you can start seeing how the kind of landscape would have been formed from the cymatics of the sound of the earth itself. And then Eric Larson is the guy that created the cymoscope, and this is when you can suddenly see how the human voice has potential to create infinitely. That with our voice, we have the potential to create everything and anything we can imagine. That we are indeed creators. And remember, every thought you have also has a frequency and a vibration, as a resonance. Just like your voice. Can you see it's got a slight toroidal feel to it? It's actually the shape manifests in a toroidal shape. Now we'll move on. And some of these pictures, the images of this cymoscope images, tell us that it was these sounds, the images of the sound, that actually inspired religious symbols. That beautiful cross in a circle at the center of some of these cymatic photographs give us a very clear indication that the creators of the religious symbols knew exactly what they were talking about, that the source of creation is sound itself. And that takes us to what sound does. Sound pretty much does everything you can imagine because it's a source of creation. By now, you would have seen this many times, just a very quick idea that sound actually does levitate things, but this is not how the ancients used to levitate the very big, heavy objects. This is a very different technique used here. This is just pressure waves that can levitate things, very light objects, but it does give you the ability to imagine that sound actually levitates. John Keeley levitated stuff and drilled sound, holes with sound in 1888 already. Peter Davey boiled water with sound since 1940, and he died several years ago. Sound creates what's known as a star in a jar, called sonoluminescence. When you take a sphere of water and you expose it to certain frequencies, it gives off a very, very bright light at the center of the water, called a star in a jar, which is just absolutely not quite what it is. Magnetrons are really just very, very, it's called a resonant cavity magnetron. that is created through resonance, sound resonance, that creates huge amounts of energy that's used in laser beams, used in microwaves, laser beams, etc. Sound acts as a cloak of invisibility. Sound can make things disappear. This 3D sort of plastic pyramid that they created, when they expose it to certain sound frequencies, anything they put underneath it disappears, becomes invisible. And then makes you wonder if that was the original idea for the structures of some monasteries. What do monks do in monasteries? They sit and chant. And I've heard from many people that do a lot of chanting and monastery kind of work, whatever that may mean, that at times when they're in a group and they're chanting, they look up and some people are gone, they're not there. I don't know if you've ever experienced that, but I've heard that from many people. They claim that people simply disappear when they get into a deep state of meditation and toning. And sound creates hurricanes. There are two guys in 2003 that lodged a patent to create hurricanes out of sound, believe it or not. And I believe they were granted their patent to create hurricanes. And maybe this is how they create the weather for us, without us even realizing it. And creates superclusters, galaxies, supercluster galaxies. This is from NASA from 2003. They say that they found a supercluster that was resonating 57 octaves lower than middle C, and it is in a key of B flat. I find it interesting, as B flat is just a semitone up from A. And if A is the first frequency or the source code of creation, and B flat is just a semitone up from that. This is just how my mind works, right? So it's very interesting. So is that like the first basic level of creation, up one level from the creative source code itself that becomes visible to us? Who knows? This is what it looks like. These are images that they show us of this galaxy. And it looks just like the cymatic patterns from Hans Jenny's the lycopodium powder creating shapes and mountains. There you go. Doesn't it look just like that? And it just realized that this is how things are created. These are the sound waves that they show us of this galaxy. And if you look at it very carefully, it's a very specific toroidal shape, toroidal pattern. And this is a fantastic one. These kids from college here in the USA that created a sound fire extinguisher. And this is years ago. You would have thought by now the fire brigades would be using it everywhere.
We're both graduating from the Electrical and Computer Engineering department at George Mason University this coming May. We're just going to test out our device that we use that uses sound frequencies to extinguish flames.
I see this device being applied to a lot of things. First off, I think in the kitchen, it could be on top of a stovetop. But eventually, I'd like to see this applied to maybe swarm robotics, where it'd be attached to a drone, and that would be applied to forest fires or even building fires, where you wouldn't want to sacrifice human life.
Professor Brian Mark really stepped in to help us.
Just gave us a lot of support.
I think as a whole, engineering is really just finding solutions finding simple solutions to complicated problems. Engineering is all about finding a way to make the impossible possible, so that's what we do.
I mean, you'd expect that to be picked up by the fire brigades, wouldn't you? It's like, no way, they're not going to do that. Imagine a big building on fire, just pull up a couple of fire trucks, blast it with sound, and fire's out. That's too easy. Can't do that. We need people to get injured and hurt so we can get insurance claims, we can have hospitals to work, we get the drug companies, everything's got to work. We got to get the corporate thing to function. We can't just solve the problem. It's not going to work for us, right? Sound creates volcanoes. Imagine, the earth is ringing like a bell all the time. So these frequencies keep coming out of the earth all the time. What do you think creates the volcanoes? What creates the heat underground that creates the volcanoes?
More like a bubbling.
Heat is just an expression of frequency, right? Actually, that we perceive as heat.
Is that sound is actually three-dimensional. We've come accustomed to seeing graphs like this. This depicts sound waves as moving in a two-dimensional pattern. or here like a sine wave, which does help us mathematically, but is not a realistic depiction of sound. This would be a more realistic depiction, showing interference from all angles.
And this is what happens when you crank it up.
High intensity, we can do something sort of like this.
There's your little volcano.
Instead of simply increasing intensity to get...
Sound energizes the air that we breathe, and that's actually one of the most exciting discoveries that I've made, is because as you breathe in the air, it always puzzled me, what happens to the oxygen that you breathe in? Why is it that we breathe the oxygen in and then we use some part of it and then we breathe the oxygen out? What happens? What happens in that process? We don't use the oxygen up. If we did, we'd be in big trouble because there'd be no bloody oxygen left, right? But so we breathe the oxygen in and then you breathe the oxygen out. So what part of the oxygen do you actually use? Well, it's the energized part of the oxygen. And what energizes the oxygen is actually the way that you breathe it in. It's the sound of the air that you breathe. Put your hand to your mouth like this, your hand to your ear, and listen. You make a lot of noise when you breathe, but you can't really hear it. And it's that sound of the air as you breathe. As it goes into your lungs, it speeds up all the time. So it's the sound of the air, and it's speeding up because it's getting into thinner and thinner capillaries all the time. So by the time the air reaches the alveoli in your lungs, it's probably moving faster than the speed of light, and it's just full of energy. And it's the sound of that, the energy of that sound that energizes the oxygen. It goes into your bloodstream, and the energy of that oxygen is stripped, and then the stripped oxygen is released back into the air. Luc Montagnier, 2011, spontaneously generated DNA in water with sound frequencies. If you go on YouTube, you can watch one of these latest documentaries where he creates a virus with a sound frequency from Paris to Rome by sending a sound frequency of a virus across a telephone line, and they reconstitute the virus that he has in a lab in Paris. They reconstitute the same virus in a lab in Rome. This is just spectacular stuff, right? So now you can see how we can manifest things. We become creators and can manifest anything with sound. And this is why we now know that sound is the ultimate source of free energy. And Nikola Tesla knew this. He knew that the earth rings like a bell, and he used the sound of the earth because it constantly rings, it never stops. He used it as a source of energy to create his free energy device. And this is where we realize that sound and magnetism is inextricably connected. It's sound that creates magnetic fields, and moving magnetic fields create electricity. It's in that order that creation seems to happen. So we don't live in an electromagnetic universe, we live in a magneto-electric universe. And please watch the DVDs and the videos online about the electric universe. That is spectacular research that tell us what the sun is, what the stars are, and how things actually function. So magnets give off sound. We all know what speakers are. So there you go. You got electricity. It comes out of a plug. It runs down a wire. It goes into a speaker, a magnet. The magnet reacts, and the magnet makes the air move and creates sound. And the reverse is possible as well. It works one way and it works the other way. And this is where we start getting into the real understanding of some of the masters. And no matter how I look at it, how much research I do, I keep coming back to one guy that stands head and shoulders above all other researchers and inventors of, I don't know, for how many centuries. And that guy's name is Nikola Tesla. By now, if you don't know him yet, I suggest you go and do some research into this guy's work. He says, if you want to find out the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration.